Pontiac's gaze hardens at Captain Morris. You English are liars, and your king sleeps while we rise. Thus begins the 1764 unraveling in Pontiac's War, as British forces push into Ohio Valley strongholds, only to face Delaware deceptions and Shawnee fury that shatter illusions of dominance. History buffs think the French and Indian War ended it all. Nope. This defiant tribal coalition nearly toppled Britain's frontier dreams, blending oracle visions with battlefield betrayals in a darkly comedic saga of hubris meeting resilience. Spring 1764 brought a shift in the British approach to the simmering conflict that had gripped the frontier since Pontiac's uprising the previous year. After a defensive scramble in 1763, where no major offensive struck the native tribes, preparations ramped up for a more decisive push. Sir William Johnson, the Superintendent of Indian Affairs, and his deputy George Croghan dispatched detailed reports to the Board of Trade, laying bare the traits, temperaments, and resources of the various tribes. They highlighted how, before the conquest of Canada, these groups had trusted the British to shield them from French encroachments, but now suspicion and outright hatred festered. This resentment stemmed from British governmental injustices, the rough treatment by frontier settlers and corrupt traders, plus the haughty demeanor of redcoat soldiers. Johnson and Croghan advocated a policy of conciliation, urging respectful treatment to soothe wounded pride and turn potential foes into allies, distancing them from lingering French influences. Croghan went further, suggesting the purchase of vast western lands to halt white incursions, using the proceeds and annual gifts to maintain peace, a plan later adopted by the British government despite its underlying assumption that the tribes would inevitably decline. These recommendations painted a picture of colonial administration as a tangled web of short-sighted decisions, much like a modern corporation ignoring employee feedback until turnover hits critical levels. Only here the stakes involved scalps and settlements rather than stock prices. Dissatisfaction rippled through the British officer corps, a universal grumble amid the hardships of a profitless, unglamorous war fought with scant resources. Legislative bodies in the colonies dragged their feet on support, amplifying the bitterness. Sir Geoffrey Amherst, the commander-in-chief, held a dim view of the natives and demanded swift retribution, issuing orders that bordered on the absurd. Major Gladwin, besieged at Detroit, received directives to immediately re-establish lost outposts, a task he deemed impossible under the circumstances, leading him to voice deep frustration and contemplate resignation. George Croghan followed suit, quitting in disgust over ignored intelligence reports, though he was persuaded to retract it when General Gage assumed command. At Fort Ligonier, Lieutenant Blaine complained endlessly of exhaustion, inadequate garrisons, and shortages of medicine and clothing for troops and militia alike. Captain Ecuyer, a Swiss officer, echoed these woes, decrying settlers who harbored deserters and the mutinous behavior of his men, whom he had to flog without court-martial just to maintain order. He begged for discharge to, as he put it, plant cabbages in peace. Even Colonel Henry Bouquet, a key figure in the upcoming operations, sought relief from his command, but Gage refused. This chorus of complaints revealed a military machine grinding under its own weight, akin to a startup team burning out on endless pivots without investor buy-in, except these officers faced ambushes and starvation instead of missed deadlines. The summer campaign plan crystallized into a two-pronged assault aimed at the heart of native territories. One army, led by Bouquet, would advance from Fort Pitt into the Delaware and Shawnee settlements in the Ohio Valley. The other, under Colonel John Bradstreet, would sweep up the Great Lakes to compel unconditional surrender from tribes around Detroit and beyond. Bradstreet carried a reputation forged in earlier exploits, like capturing Fort Frontenac and bold actions at the Oswego River, but observers noted his energy often outpaced judgment, marked by stubbornness, vanity, and a thirst for glory. His assembled provincials from the northern colonies proved subpar, resembling hospital patients more than fit soldiers for grueling duties. They mustered at Albany in late June, trekking westward via the Mohawk River, Oneida Lake, and Onondaga Lake to reach Oswego, then sailing into Lake Ontario, where a storm battered them before docking at Fort Niagara. Total strength hovered around 1,200 men, a modest force for the ambitions at hand, underscoring the British Empire's overextension in a conflict that felt like managing a sprawling franchise with undertrained staff and faulty supply chains, where every delay invited disaster from competitors who knew the terrain intimately. Fort Niagara in July 1764 buzzed like a frontier bazaar on steroids, with hundreds of native lodges dotting the landscape and warriors from diverse tribes milling about in a riot of feathers, paint, and wary glances. Bradstreet's army arrived to this spectacle, greeted by a throng that included Ojibwas, Ottawas, Menominees, and more, all drawn by Johnson's summons. The superintendent had sent messengers warning of impending British assaults while inviting those seeking peace to parley, a classic carrot-and-stick ploy that echoed modern ceasefire negotiations where one side holds all the drones. The natives had endured a brutal winter, cut off from trade in furs, ammunition, and essentials, with French aid proving a mirage and some allies already flipping to the British side. This hardship doused their war fever, turning potential combatants into pragmatic attendees, some professing friendship, others spying, and a few just chasing gifts and rum. The assembly swelled to over 2,000 warriors, a powder keg where goodwill masked underlying tensions, as stray shots at soldiers reminded everyone of the fragile truce. Deep in Ojibwa territory, Alexander Henry, the fur trader who barely escaped the Michilimackinac massacre, witnessed a surreal ritual when Johnson's envoy arrived. The messenger touted a grand feast at Niagara, noting the Six Nations peace with the British, and urging the Ojibwas to follow suit or face annihilation, especially amid rumors of aiding Pontiac. Torn between loyalty and survival, the tribe opted to consult the Great Turtle, guardian of spirits, in a ceremony straight out of a psychedelic vision quest. A massive lodge housed the medicine man on a makeshift altar, the structure quaking with eerie howls before a faint puppy-like voice emerged, hailed as the infallible oracle. Warriors queried if the British truly amassed at Niagara for war. The spirit affirmed seas of boats laden with redcoats. On hospitality, it promised bountiful gifts, from blankets and kettles to guns, powder, and rum barrels, ensuring safe return. This prophecy ignited cheers, swaying many to attend, a decision blending mysticism with cold calculation, much like consulting a stock oracle before a market crash, where divine whispers guide earthly gambles. The Niagara gathering rivaled any colonial summit in scale, uniting Menominees, Ottawas, Ojibwas, Mississaugas, Caughnawagas, Wyandots, Iroquois, and distant reps from Saukes, Foxes, Winnebagos, and Osages. Despite overt amity, dangers lurked, demanding vigilance amid the crowds. Delawares and Shawnees sent defiant messages scorning the British yet dangling peace talks. Johnson ignored them, letting their raids continue unchecked. Senecas, after breaking prior vows, faced threats of village raids, compelling them to deliver prisoners and deserters before signing a treaty, barring further attacks and ceding a 4-mile strip along the Niagara River between Lakes Erie and Ontario. Wyandots from Detroit followed with their own pact. Johnson masterminded separate councils per tribe, fostering jealousy and rivalry to fracture unity, a divide-and-conquer tactic akin to pitting startup rivals against each other in a pitch competition. Ottawas and Menominees earned warm receptions for past aid to British troops, denying Pontiac ties and pledging loyalty, rewarded with trade access denied to others. By the 6th of August, Johnson departed for Oswego, his diplomacy having neutralized key threats without a shot. Though the peace proved as stable as a house of wampum beads, post-Niagara dispersal, Bradstreet's force pressed onward from Fort Schlosser on the 8th of August, bolstered by 300 friendly natives and Canadians, navigating Lake Erie's southern shore in a flotilla that screamed imperial ambition. Alexander Henry commanded a Ojibwa and Mississauga contingent, but most deserted after snagging arms and clothes, their drunken antics drawing Bradstreet's ire and further defections, leaving Henry with a skeleton crew of hunters. Iroquois allies persisted, and Highland reinforcements swelled ranks, yet the expedition's cohesion frayed like a poorly knotted rope in a tug-of-war. This motley advance mirrored a corporate merger gone awry, where promised synergies dissolve into finger-pointing and bailouts, all while the competition circles. On the 12th of August, near Presque Isle, envoys claiming Delaware and Shawnee leadership approached for peace, met with suspicion from officers and bloodlust from native allies who pegged them as spies, their meager wampum belt unfit for serious diplomacy. Bradstreet, ignoring red flags and his strict orders for firmness, inked a preliminary treaty promising no attacks if they met at Sandusky in 25 days to surrender prisoners and finalize terms. This naive accord, later revealed as a stalling tactic amid ongoing frontier massacres, drew Gage's fury, who voided it outright. Bradstreet even messaged Bouquet, claiming the foes subdued Sand's aid, a boast Bouquet dismissed in outrage, pressing his own march. The colonel's presumption echoed a viral tweet gone wrong, amplifying backlash faster than apologies could contain it. At Sandusky, Bradstreet targeted Wyandots, Ottawas, and Miamis, but accepted their pleas to delay attacks for a Detroit parley, sparing an easy conquest. Before departing, he dispatched Captain Morris on a foolhardy mission to Illinois with Canadians and natives, risking a valued officer in hostile lands, a decision reeking of overconfidence like sending an intern to negotiate a hostile takeover without backup. This advance, riddled with missteps, highlighted Bradstreet's blend of bravado and blunder, setting the stage for reversals that would humble British pretensions in the wilderness. The 26th of August, 1764, saw Bradstreet's flotilla glide into the Detroit River like a parade of mismatched ambitions, anchoring near the fort amid cheers from the garrison and dubious shouts from nearby Wyandotte villagers. The troops inside had held out for over 15 months, their relief palpable as fresh soldiers replaced the weary, a swap that felt like rotating staff in a besieged startup where burnout had long set in. Bradstreet wasted no time investigating Canadian collaborators who had aided the natives, punishing the few caught while most slipped away into the woods. Pontiac, meanwhile, had retreated to the Maumee River's banks, firing off arrogant challenges that echoed like unanswered emails in a corporate feud. Villages around Detroit stood eerily empty or stocked with starving inhabitants eager for peace, their winter hardships turning war drums into pleas for trade. The 7th of September Council unfolded outdoors with full military pomp, drawing Ottawas, Ojibwas, Potawatomis, Miamis, Saukes, and Wyandottes, in a display that masked underlying resentments, much like a board meeting where smiles hide shareholder revolts. Ojibwa Chief Wasson kicked off proceedings, declaring divine intervention had softened their hearts toward peace, a turnaround he pinned on misguided elders and warriors who had sparked the conflict. His candid admission of blame carried the weight of a public apology in a scandal-plagued era, where accountability often arrived too late to mend fences. Bradstreet demanded they submit as subjects to the British king, claiming total sovereignty over their lands, an overreach that ignored the very freedoms fueling the uprising, akin to a tech giant asserting ownership over user data without consent. Fortunately for the talks, native languages lacked equivalents for such concepts, interpreting the demand as mere flattery, agreeing to call the king father while reserving the right to rebel at whim. Bradstreet boasted of unprecedented subjugation, but reality soon unraveled his claims. His reliance on French interpreters left officers and Iroquois allies in the dark, breeding mistrust, and his dramatic axe chopped through a sacred wampum belt sparked outrage, a cultural faux pas equivalent to shredding a contract mid-negotiation. Afterward, he dispatched Captain Howard to reclaim Michilimackinac, Green Bay, and Sault Ste. Marie, extending British reach with the subtlety of a viral expansion campaign. Captain Thomas Morris, fluent in French and brimming with misplaced confidence, volunteered for the Illinois Trek, a venture Bradstreet equipped with Canadian interpreter Godefroy, whose oath of protection stemmed from a perceived life debt. Accompanied by aides and native escorts, Morris's party neared Pontiac's camp only to face encirclement by hundreds of warriors, Pontiac himself refusing a handshake with a scowl that spoke volumes. A French drummer named St. Vincent, a turncoat blending savagery with European airs, presided like a dubious mediator in a high-stakes arbitration. Pontiac branded the English liars, probing Morris's intent amid readings from a forged French letter promising royal vengeance on the British. A propaganda piece that fueled delusions like fake news in an election cycle. Sheltered by St. Vincent, Morris endured a council where his blunt revelation of France's cession met mockery, not fury. Though calls for his death rang out until Pontiac intervened, honoring ambassadorial sanctity while vowing eternal enmity. Chaos erupted when a Mohawk deserter stole rum, inciting a drunken frenzy where a young warrior's knife thrust was parried by Godefroy, forcing Morris to hide in cornfields until calm returned. A minor chief later gifted him a Shakespeare volume in exchange for powder, an odd cultural exchange underscoring the surreal blend of worlds colliding. Pressing toward Fort Miami, Morris's group encountered a mob incited by Delaware and Shawnee agitators, stripping and binding him for torture in a village ritual that flipped from rescue to peril. Godefroy's loyalty shone as he rallied Pontiac's nephew for aid, with Miami chief the Swan briefly untying Morris only for the White Cat to rebind him to a stake. Despair gripped Morris until Chief Pecan arrived, declaring his life spared and scorning the mob's bloodlust, urging them to seek foes elsewhere like Detroit's battlefields. Ejected from the village, Morris found refuge in the fort with Canadian guardians and unexpected aid from 2 squaw women, yet threats from Kickapoos persisted. Determined at first to push on, he abandoned the mission amid escalating dangers and deserters, staggering back to Detroit on the 17th of September near starvation. His journal, dispatched to Bradstreet, lambasted the deceptive envoys with a bitter wish for their collective drowning, a sentiment that mirrored the campaign's growing frustrations like a project report highlighting every managerial oversight. Bradstreet looped back to Sandusky, clinging to his shaky accord with the Delaware and Shawnee delegations, eyes fixed on the horizon for promised prisoners that never materialized, their vows evaporating like morning mist over the lake. Then came Gage's dispatch, a verbal lashing that branded his diplomacy a fiasco and ordered him to shatter those very promises, marching straight into enemy heartlands on the Scioto Plains without delay. Fury boiled in Bradstreet as he pored over Morris's journal, the pages dripping with accounts of deceit that made his earlier trust look like a gambler's bad bet in a rigged casino. Reluctant to comply, he cited seasonal impossibilities, paths too treacherous for advance, though viable routes stared back from maps like ignored GPS reroutes in a modern traffic jam. Days dragged on in camp stagnation, sickness snaking through ranks while discontent festered, soldiers muttering about their commander's erratic swings, from iron-fisted to inexplicably lenient toward the local natives, a leadership style that bred resentment faster than frontier rumors. Finally, Bradstreet opted for retreat, blaming depleted supplies and the encroaching season, dismantling camp in a rush that left 2 fishermen stranded like forgotten extras in a poorly directed escape scene. They pitched tents on an exposed beach, scorning safer riverbanks nearby, only for a gale to slam in, splintering half the boats and scattering 6 cannons, ammunition, food, arms, and baggage into the waves or abandonment. The bulk of his force, now boatless, splintered further, with a detachment of about 150 natives and provincials condemned to a grueling overland trek to Niagara, where hardships claimed lives in a grim procession that echoed corporate layoffs during a merger meltdown, survivors limping and battered and fewer. The main body reached Niagara by the 4th of November, sailing toward Oswego until another storm claimed a schooner laden with troops, a watery grave that underscored the expedition's cursed luck. Outcomes mixed like a half-baked strategy session. Detroit tribes fell into line for temporary quiet, outposts re-established rippling influence across the Great Lakes. Yet Sandusky lingered as unfinished business, with locals sneering at British frailty. Bradstreet's blunders inflicted lasting damage, alienating Iroquois allies who seethed at his disrespect and mocked his softness toward foes, unraveling Johnson's hard-won diplomatic threads, while Bouquet's southern thrust promised sharper results in the shadows. Bradstreet's campaign fizzled into retreats and storms, leaving tribes defiant and allies disillusioned in Pontiac's war wake. It exposed British overreach, where bluster met native cunning, draining resources before true peace settled. History smirks at such imperial stumbles, foreshadowing bigger fractures. That defiance echoes today. Subscribe to Native Legends and History Stories for more unflinching frontier tales.